For hundreds of great shows like this one, go to onnetworks.com.
You know, like the comic book, you know, or like early sports, you know, video games have traditionally been thought about as a guy's medium. When most people think about video games, they associate it with the dude.
Even larger than video games, just new technology is usually associated with men, and it kind of came out of computer programming.
And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say guys have traditionally loved working with machines, getting their hands on, re-engineering, tinkering with things. So, you know, in the 50s, what they had to work with, they had their cars, you know, they had big pieces of hardware. But then enter the computer age. That same mentality and those same guys actually jumped from working on their cars to actually building computer programs.
By default, computer programmers were mainly guys, so games were mainly a guy thing.
Guys played the games, guys made the games, and most of the games were about guys shooting other guys. Fast forward a couple of decades, and now almost half of all gamers are women, and there's really no stigma attached to being a girl gamer anymore. How did this happen?
So if you want to talk about gender in video games, you really have to break it down into 3 parts. It's the content of the game, it's who's playing the game, and who's making the games.
If we look back at Atari's arcade division back in 1980, there were about 30 software engineers working there. Out of those, one was a woman, Donna Bailey, and she went on to help co-create one of the biggest arcade hits of all time, Centipede.
At the time, nobody knew Centipede was designed by a woman. Everyone just knew it as the next Atari game. But for some reason, a lot of women like to play Centipede.
So there are actually a lot of theories as to why women like to play Centipede. One is because the colors of the game, like a lot of other video games at the time, had really bright, kind of harsh colors. And Centipede had a lot of nice, soft pastels.
A lot of powder blues and lime greens and light pinks, and maybe on those rare occasions when girls went into the arcade, they were drawn to this cabinet. Nobody knows for sure, but that seems to be the main theory because Millipede, the identical game, total sausage fest.
Donna Bailey was the first female designer for an arcade game, but the first female game designer was Carol Shaw, who developed games for the Atari 2600.
While at Atari, she created 3D tic-tac-toe and then video checkers. Later, she went to Activision, where she created one of the masterpieces of that era, River Raid.
Yeah, it's interesting when you actually look back at some of the classic Atari games, you start to realize a lot of the really good ones were made by women. You had Laura Nikolic, who designed Spider-Man, which also happened to be one of the few decent games built on a license. You look at one of Atari's defining games, Warlords, was designed by a woman named Carla Meninsky.
So as PCs became capable of playing more and more complicated games, people started to design games that would appeal to your intellect and not just your trigger finger. Roberta Williams created the King's Quest series, which is one of the first medieval adventure RPG style games, and Jane Jensen worked on some of those games and went on to create the Gabriel Knight series, still the predominant name in mystery adventure gaming.
Besides Centipede, the first game to actually have any kind of female following was Pac-Man.
The game designer Toru Iwatani, he was looking around the arcade and realized that, you know, most of these games are shooters, they're sport related, they're about racing things. They're games that are rooted in like male fantasy.
So he goes and decides, I'm going to design a video game for women. Pac-Man is born. And as you look at Pac-Man, you realize, you know, it's more of a game of tag than it is killing things. It wasn't like the bad guys were real bad guys. You know, they're colorful characters with big eyes. It's not like a bomb's gonna go off and destroy the world. It's eating and it's playing tag.
You just kind of drove Pac-Man around with the joystick, but you didn't press any buttons to shoot or fire or kill anything. So even if you weren't really used to playing video games, you could just really go up and start playing it right away.
Women helped Pac-Man become the #1 game in the world. And so they said, shoot, let's follow that up. So they introduced Miss Pac-Man.
Here you actually had the first game that let you play as a female protagonist, in addition to the fact that it was already built on a game mechanic that women loved.
And not only is it starring a woman, are the colors more feminine, but there are cutscenes. And what happens in the cutscenes? Pac-Man meets Miss Pac-Man, boy meets girl. They get together, they get married, they have a baby.
You know, it was the inclusion of more specifically female elements, the inclusion of a female protagonist, this narrative that actually led Ms. Pac-Man to become the biggest selling arcade game in history. more than 115,000 sold.
So the lesson here is if you make a game targeted toward women, you're guaranteed to have a big hit. And it's proven more recently with The Sims.
Instead of just running around and shooting things, in The Sims you're building things, you're designing a house, you're building people, you're building relationships between these people, all things that appeal to female gamers. And The Sims went on to become the #1 PC game franchise of all time, showing that if you want to sell a lot of copies of games, you can't ignore half your audience, you have to bring women into the equation.
While Miss Pac-Man was the first female protagonist in games, it'd be a while till we'd see a full-fledged ass-kicking female action hero in a game, which happened as kind of a surprise to most gamers in '87 with Metroid.
This is actually a fairly standard side-scrolling shooter, and you'd run around and do all the normal things you do in a video game, but at the very end the character takes off her helmet and reveals that she's actually a chick, shocking millions of prepubescent Nintendo players everywhere.
And that almost says more than it being a woman, just the idea that it was a twist that it was a woman. They used your expectations that the hero was a man against you.
Most young men who were playing the game, they didn't mind, because the game itself was so good, and because it introduced this layer of narrative complexity that you just don't see in games. People loved it.
But just to make sure the men weren't too disappointed, if you beat it in a certain amount of time, you got to see Samus in a bikini, which set off years of rumors that if you beat it in an inhumanly low amount of time, you got to see her with even less. And people are still working on this problem today. We have our finest men across the country. We've gotten it down to a half hour, and we're pretty sure if we can get lower, we're gonna see Samus naked, so some big news coming, people.
So Samus may have been the first female action hero in a game, but the biggest of all time was Lara Croft from the Tomb Raider series.
Lara Croft was originally designed to be a guy, but it would have been too close to Indiana Jones, so they make the switch, make her a woman, a British aristocrat. Now it adds a whole new level of cool to the game.
You know, really, Lara Croft was just so outrageous and so fun. I mean, she looked like a playboy, she kicked more butt than all the guys, and then went on to be not only the most famous female star in a video game, but just the most famous video game character, period.
Lara Croft goes on to be a huge sex symbol for the gaming industry. Lara Croft shows up in comics, commercials, movies, novels, magazines. I mean, you name it, Lara Croft is there.
Lara might have been the reigning video game character sex symbol, but the first video game sex symbol that was an actual person was a game designer named Stevie Case.
Stevie Case became famous in 1996 after she beat the creator of Quake, John Romero, at his own game. This is a big deal because not only did she beat the creator of Quake at his own game, but it was really kind of a dude game. It was like the guys game. It wasn't like she beat him in Hearts. She beat him in this game where you're shooting everyone in the face.
You know, Playboy, they're always really good at finding, who would be really interesting to just show naked. And so Stevie Case ended up being the first professional gamer to pose nude in Playboy, which actually then led to Playboy implementing a whole annual series of the best naked video game characters, which is creepy and intriguing.
Last year they had Miss Pac-Man without her bow, and pretty controversial because it just looked like Pac-Man. But some guys are into that kind of thing. Who am I to judge? Hey, just keep Baby Pac out of it.
So today, 43% of gamers are women. That's almost half of a huge multi-billion-dollar industry. And there are a lot of categories, like The Sims, like casual games, where women totally dominate.
And there are more women over the age of 18 that play games than there are men under the age of 18, which is ironic because initially people thought only 15-year-old boys play games. It's not the case anymore.
And of course, there are tons of websites for girl gamers, girl gaming clans out there. In fact, one of the first big sites was GameGal.com, founded by one of our co-panelists, Libby Goat.
And then you have the entire casual games industry, which is huge, and women dominate that market completely. The card games, the word games, puzzle games, women have basically breathed life into that entire industry.
If you could appeal to women, you would double the amount of people you could sell video games to, and Nintendo realized that when they made the Wii. It's very casual, it's very friendly. Beyond the system being simple and just not having a lot of buttons, the games are geared towards women. There's a lot of puzzle games, a lot of casual games. A lot of the Wii games encourage people to get up off the couch and socialize and have fun, and that appeals to women. So I've heard.
Now, what's the #1 console out there right now? The Wii, which proves that if you build your machine to appeal to a huge, wide mass audience, including women, you're going to be laughing all the way to the bank.
Now it's just like the movie industry. There are guy movies, girl movies, and movies that appeal to both. There are guy games, girl games, games that appeal to both.
And so you kind of have your, I'm going to chainsaw your crotch game over here, and then you have your nice puzzle game over here with maybe less violent. And that, but you also have a bunch of games in between that appeal to both genders. And so it really is, there's something for everyone out there.
You know, women are just one big game that no one's managed to beat yet. You can use that.
For hundreds of great shows like this one, go to OnNetworks.com.